Good morning. My name is Michael Kende, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to Digital Trust 2025. It's nice to see people in person for a change, so thank you very much for coming out, and thanks also to those of you online for participating in the conference today. This is the second joint conference that we've done with between the Graduate Institute and its Center for Trade and Economic Integration and the EPFL and its Center for Digital Trust. Last year's was called Data 2025. And one of the things that came out was that there were very few people using the COVID contact tracing apps in spite of the possibility of helping to stop transmission and deal with the pandemic. And a few of the EPFL professors had helped to design and spoke about the design and said it was very privacy preserving. It didn't gather data about location and other things, and it didn't share that with authorities, but very few people were using it, and the main reason was because they were worried about their privacy. And that's repeated itself in most countries. Then, as you may know, Switzerland had a vote about digital ID, and that was voted down by 64% of the population, and again, the main reason was to do with privacy, in this case because the private companies were going to be running the digital ID system. So we decided this year that we should focus on digital trust and explore some of these issues and ask some questions. The first one is why is there this lack of trust? What is causing it? How does it manifest itself? People are still using apps that take far more information and share far more information than the COVID contact tracing apps. There's literally a flashlight app that keeps track of people's location and shares it with advertisers, so much more information for what I would argue is much less benefit than a contact tracing app would have had. So we want to look at that, and then we want to also look at the fact that people are saying that they don't trust the companies with the digital ID, but we trust companies every day. We trust banks with our money. We trust pharmaceuticals to put in our body. We get in cars. We get on elevators. So there is trust in companies. So we're going to explore how other companies in other industries have managed to generate digital trust, or trust. Some of them are starting to go digital, so they'll be able to explain that as well. Then we're going to look in the afternoon at some future services and products that are digital and try and understand those and what kind of trust will be needed and what will be the cost of not being able to generate digital trust to use those new services. And the final panel will look at how we build digital trust going forward. But first, to set the stage, we're very pleased to have the heads of both of the institutions organizing this conference, Marie-Laure Salles, the director of the Graduate Institute, and Martin Vetterli, the president of the EPFL, along with Richard Baldwin, professor of international economics here at the Graduate Institute. So please, Marie-Laure, would you come up and give us your welcoming remarks?
Pardon. Thank you, Michael. Good morning, Martin. Good morning, Richard. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to all of you, whether here in the Amphithéâtre Pictet at Maison de la Paix or online. A very warm welcome to the Graduate Institute. It's a real pleasure to be able to welcome you this year, at least some of you this year in physical form. Last year, we had a purely online meeting, so I was talking to a screen, which is always much less pleasant, you have to admit. So this full day of discussions on the articulation of the digitalization of everything and the question of trust is a great way to continue the exploration you launched last year of the nature and the role of the digital and of its associated strengths and challenges. The COVID period has only rendered more acute and urgent a focus on what we could call the rules of the game. A digitalized world pushes forward the same kinds of questions, in fact, that are associated with a non-digitalized world, but it pushes them with a particular, quite unique and urgent texture. Amongst those questions, we find questions of access, questions of inequalities, questions of power, questions of governance, Also questions of sustainability and impact, maybe too rarely explored, in fact, in the case of the digital world, and impact on the environment. And last but not least, legitimacy and trust. The COVID period has only been an accelerator of trends that were already strongly there with us, in fact, with respect to this digital world. From a sociological perspective, I'm a sociologist, nobody is perfect, the two notions of trust and legitimacy are difficult to disentangle. They are tightly connected, and if we go back to Max Weber's classic typology of forms of legitimacy, what we can keep here is the important distinction between direct forms of legitimacy and hence trust building, and the more indirect and abstract ones. The more we move into a world of abstract legitimacy, the more complex it is to sustain trust. And our modern or postmodern world, whatever we choose to call it, is a world where forms of legitimacy become more and more distant and indirect, more and more abstract. This is one of the reasons, by the way, why we are moving in our societies from a trust society towards an audit society. In fact, it might be just, and in fact, trust and audit are really very different. The more we need to audit, the more this reveals that we cannot trust, in fact, and the more we generate the need for more audit as a consequence. As one of my colleagues, Michael Power, has aptly shown in many books and papers on the subject, an audit society is the other side of a spiral of distrust, so characteristic of our modern, postmodern world. Let me here quote also Anthony Giddens and other sociologists to say the same thing, but with different words. Abstract systems depend on trust, yet they provide none of the moral rewards which can be obtained from personalized trust, the trust that I have in you as a person, because I know you, because I have, deep connections and links with you. So it provides none of the moral rewards which we can be obtained from personalized trust, or were often available in traditional settings from the moral frameworks within which everyday life was undertaken. Moreover, says Anthony Giddens still, the wholesale penetration of abstract systems into daily life creates risks which the individual is not well placed to confront. The digital clearly is one of those modern, essentially abstract systems, not the only one, far from it. Science is another one, or modern democratic politics is also another one. And the digital, furthermore, indeed penetrates wholesale our daily lives, to quote Anthony Giddens. It's very clear that we are therefore not well placed to confront, to react to this, whether as individuals or as communities. So I'm sure that the following questions and many others will be explored today. Are we really going to be able to talk about trust in the digital world, or are we merely going to talk about an audit governance system, which, by the way, would be already a very good and necessary first step? Can we learn from history and the oligopoly/monopoly busting moment in early 20th century American capitalism to bring back some measure of power equilibrium, of power balance in the current, let's say, economic scene of the digital, to remain vague enough, and to, in the process, reestablish some degree of legitimacy? How do we work from the individuals up, as it were, through reinvented education programs that give individuals the right tools to handle, if not master, the digital? And, I was talking with Martin about that just before. These types of programs imply that we train people who are both digitally fluent, but also social science fluent. And that's really something that is going to be extremely important in the coming years. Knowing that rebuilding trust and legitimacy is a sine qua non condition for the digital to become what it should be, a potential, powerful tool of our collective well-being. So how do we master the digital for our collective well-being and not simply for the maximization of the shareholder value of a number of companies? Before I hand it over to Richard Baldwin, who will bring us directly into those questions, let me end this by giving some thanks. Thank you first to our friends from EPFL with whom we partner on this event. Thank you, dear Martin, for your presence today, this morning. And Martin told me it was the first time he came to the Institute, so I'm really happy to be able to welcome him at the Institute. And thank you for your willingness to give the keynote today. The collaboration between our two institutions is very important to me, to us, and I only hope that we can further deepen it, you know that. Thank you, Jean-Pierre Hubot and Olivier Crochat, for all your work in co-organizing the event at the Institute. I would like to thank Richard Baldwin and Michael Kende, obviously, but also Tamara Pironet, Michael Obumbois, Juanita Kalibala, and Michelle Holguin-Flückliger for all the energies they've put into organizing this event. I know it was intense, but also for all the energies they're putting into working on many different kinds of issues within the context of the center. More generally, let me say how delighted I am to see this kind of collaboration between the Institute and EPFL on topics such as data, opportunities and risks of digitalization, internet and its governance. It's quite clear, I said that already, but I want to repeat it, that we need to create spaces of collaboration, discussion, co-construction between science and technology on the one hand and social and human sciences on the other. It's only if we take this interface seriously that we can move towards a digitalized society that does not veer into radical dystopia and provides us instead with the necessary tools for an economy and a society that should be more sustainable and more inclusive. It's only if we take this interface seriously between sciences and social sciences that we can steer technology to the service of humanity and avoid what otherwise could be indeed a radical techlash or the very destruction of what humanity is all about, the social, the emotional, our multiple senses and their expression, freedom, critical thinking. Let me also underscore how those opportunities and challenges, those avenues for radical progress or radical threats are all by nature transnational. And therefore, you know, we believe that an institute like ours has a very particular role to play in the debates around those issues, in the exploration of those questions. When I see the program, I only wish I could stay for the entire day, which is unfortunately not possible. I wish you all very rich, very productive discussions, and I'm really looking forward to a continuing collaboration between our two institutions on those issues of urgent importance. Beyond Tech for Good, you all know by now that I keep saying that we should work together towards a more ambitious horizon, what I like to call good in tech. This horizon is impossible without the type of broad and deep interdisciplinarity that a collaboration between our institutions would make possible. The prospect is very inspiring, at least to me. So, un grand merci, thank you, and I think I hand the word to Richard.
Well, I'm going to continue a little bit in the line of Marie-Laure, but I'd like to start with a provocation. Because it's Friday at the end of a long week, and it's morning. Actually, 3 provocations, if you allow me, Mr. Chairman, Michael. I knew he'd say yes. That's why I asked. 2. Number 1, trust is a cyborg. Trust is a cyborg. There's part machine and part human. Both parts of the cyborg are tricky, but I would submit to you that it is a human bit which is trickier. Provocation number 2. Evolutionary psychology is about trust. In writing my latest book, Michael, did I mention I have a book? You don't think I'd come up here without promoting my book? Do we have a slide? No. Anyways, I read a lot about Robin Dunbar's work on evolutionary psychology. Fascinating stuff. You really should buy or read Dunbar's book. He has a book. Now, the touchstone of that field is that humans' evolutionary superpower is social cooperation. Our ability to coordinate and cooperate in large numbers is why humans bestride the earth. It is why we watch chimps in zoos instead of the other way around. One theory is that our brain got big to handle the combinatorics involved in social interactions. And you may wonder what this has to do with trust, but here it is. The key to this cooperation is the formation of trust bonds. We can cooperate because we trust each other. But herein lies the fundamental tension of human cooperation. If I know you trust me, I am tempted, from an evolutionary perspective, to cheat on you, to free ride. This is why humans are so acutely attuned to detecting cheaters, and why cheating leads to instinctual rage or disgust. The tools that evolution gave us to detect cheating are largely based on face-to-face signals, body languages, and any mismatch between the body language, which is generated by the lizard brain, and the verbal language, which is generated by the cortex. Now, there's a whole field studying this. I'm not making it up. You can read books on nonverbal communication. You can read books on how people detect lying. Much of it is face-to-face. And it's why in-person events like this are so much richer and rewarding. So what's this got to do with digital? The digital world has stripped away the tools that humans instinctively use to establish trust in other humans. That's a problem of first order. Provocation number 3. We are here to talk about mistrust, not trust. Mistrust, not trust. That may seem like a distinction without a difference, but I would argue it is not. Our baked-in evolutionary psychology gives us a long memory of cheating instances. That is why keeping trust alive is a whole lot easier than bringing it back to life. To use a distinctly non-digital phrase, trust arrives on foot but leaves on horseback. So I'll stop there. Trust is a cyborg. Evolutionary psychology is a thing, and we're talking about mistrust, not trust. As I said, those are provocations, not solutions, but I thought I'd leave it with that. Thank you very much. Vetterli, president of EPFL.
Great. It's a great pleasure to be here at the Graduate Institute. Thank you very much, Marie-Laure, Richard, Michael, and the organizers for inviting me. It's truly the first time I'm inside the building. Usually I'm just across the train tracks because EPFL has a campus called Campus Biotech. And so I see the beautiful building from outside. And I was always dreaming of being inside. So now dream come true. Now, Richard Baldwin is a very hard act to follow, as I know from the WEF and other places where I heard him talk. Oh, thank you very much. But I'll try. And I'll just start with a question. How many of you, please raise your hand, still uses WhatsApp? Who uses WhatsApp? This is amazing. Okay, so I thought mistrust was, the third provocation. So you guys are amazing. Where is the horse so that, trust leaves with a horse on horseback? I don't see it. So I actually skipped WhatsApp when they did the update on privacy settings because it was totally unclear what was going to happen. So I erased WhatsApp, but I was obviously the only one in the room, right? And lots of people are annoyed because, how can you leave WhatsApp and so on? But, that's a basic question. There is absolutely no trust in current technology. And I, talk here as a technologist. So let me give you 3 points or actually 4, as an introduction. And the first one is there a problem? I think we already know there is a problem, but I'll give a few more examples. Then I'll discuss a little bit the notion of trust, how I see it. And it's interesting. I think trust is a result of evolutionary biology. I totally agree with this. And, if we don't deal with it properly, we'll be inside the cage and the chimpanzees will watch us. So maybe we should actually work on the problem seriously. Then talk a little bit about what I think the governance should be around digital trust. And then talk just a little bit of what's happening in arc lémanique between our various institutions on this topic, which is very important fundamentally, but it's also very important here in the arc lémanique because of the presence of all the international organizations in Geneva and the various institutes and universities in the arc lémanique. Okay, so is trust a new problem or privacy? So I'll take privacy. The issue of privacy, for example, with medical data,
recording
is one
in
of the
progress.
hot topics. It's really an impediment to progress, actually, in using data around developing, drugs and cures and so on. Interestingly, the founder of modern medicine, Hippocrates, said, "All that may come to my knowledge in the exercise of my profession as a medical doctor or in daily commerce with man, which ought not to be spread abroad, I will keep secret and will never reveal." So, 2.5 millennia ago, we sort of knew there was a problem and there was a way to actually take care of the problem. So something went wrong along the way. Okay, so today I think we are in a disastrous situation. Here is a quote about Cambridge Analytica. "Personal data is out there and is used against us in ways we do not understand." I think it, puts democracy in trouble, as we saw in the United States. It leads to manipulation of elections. This is interesting because usually, we thought, the Western world knew how to run democracies and we would teach it to the rest of the world. It turns out we don't know how to run democracy in a digital world either. Of course, the key culprits, I'm sorry to say, because some representatives of companies are in the room, maybe not of Facebook. This is my favorite cartoon by Chapat, a local cartoonist who used to be in the New York Times, okay? And as you know, the New York Times stopped cartoons. That's another issue about digitalization and trust and open debate. Anyway, so the cartoon says it all, right? This is our friend Zuki helping us getting rid of our personal data. Now, Zuckerberg, does exactly what he has to do. He generates shareholder value. If you would ask shareholders of Facebook, if, lowering the privacy protection is good for business, they would all applaud because it's very good for Facebook's business. What I totally do not understand is that government just sits there and think it's just a proper way to do it. Marie-Laure mentions the beginning of the 20th century where there's a problem of monopoly and governments actually took the case in their own hands, broke up big monopolies and so on. Around, digital monopolies, very little is happening. Of course, the governments themselves are not very good either, and this is one of my favorite memes, right? So the kid says, "Dad says you're spying on us," and Obama says, "He's not your dad." So, we never know if NSA or Facebook knows more about you. Probably, they exchange data happily. So good. So we have a problem, and I think the problem is the relationship between, society, humans, which are still driven by reptilian brains most of the time, and companies that have incredibly powerful technologies and no incentives not to do all the bad things they are actually doing. Sorry to be so explicit. And, I get funding from Google and others, so I can speak openly about the issue. With total conflict of interest. All right, so is trust a new issue? No, and I usually show this, which I'm sure you know this about blockchain. Blockchain is a very old idea. If I have to choose what I trust more, the Swiss franc or what's called the ray stones of the island of Yap. The ray stones are these elements that sort of show who owns actually a certain property or a certain amount of value. And the blockchain is actually oral history. This is something that has been used for hundreds of years in the South Pacific. So the idea of blockchain is, is not new at all. And it's, of course, distributed trust, it's traceability, it's transparency. When people think Bitcoin is bad because it helps cybercrime, it depends how you look at it, because it's also a way to actually keep track of exchanges. And if you have to transform Bitcoins into dollars, you actually need a physical place, well, physical in the sense of a accredited place to actually do the transformation. And if that's regulated, cybercrime is actually also regulated, just like money laundering is regulated. So technology is actually very powerful and present. It's simply not used by governments and by societies to the best of current knowledge. Good. So now the issue I think we have, and at EPFL we have been thinking about this for a number of years. Olivier Crochat, the executive director of the Center for Digital Trust, is here. And I think Jean-Pierre Rubaud, my colleague and academic director of C4DT, will join us later. The idea is, okay, we go into this cyber world, and how are we going to recreate trust we are used to in a physical world? In Dunbar was mentioned, so the Dunbar number says you can, sort of recognize 150 people and have trust relationships. Well, even my daughter has, I don't know how many friends on Facebook. I don't know how she does it. She must have a much bigger brain than my little nut here. There is a problem. It doesn't scale, right? So technology has been scaling exponentially. We as humans have not really followed up. And to recreate the notion of trust in the digital world is a true challenge, not just technologically. It's in principle easy if governance is right, but I think it's very hard for humans to actually accomplish this feat. That we are losing trust, I mentioned several examples, and they are listed here. There is a long laundry list of why trust has been eroding. There are a few lone voices like The Guardian, the New York Times, and a few others that are watching out, but they don't have the same business model as Facebook. They're actually probably struggling to make shareholder value, but I think these are exactly the people we know: free press, free media, and so on. In Switzerland, an example of mistrust, which was misplaced, it was mentioned before, is the Swiss COVID app. And since EPFL was deeply involved in the development of Swiss COVID app, this is amazing because it is best of class privacy. It was developed in 6 weeks during the first wave of the COVID. It's a totally distributed system with no traceability, no location, and so on. Very smart protocol. Actually so smart that this protocol influenced Google and Apple to, for once, collaborate and change their operating system so that the COVID app could actually be used and do digital contact tracing. So far, so good. Okay, that was a good part of the story. But then, of course, all of a sudden, people who use, WhatsApp and Facebook and Instagram and so on, sort of said, oh, but this could actually be a privacy risk, okay? So we are in the middle of a pandemic. Here is something that is order of magnitude better than what most people use daily. And all of a sudden people say, well, maybe it's not what we should be using. I was totally flabbergasted, but it showed that technology is good, but it's certainly not enough. And if we don't work properly, and here I come back to what Marie-Laure said, if we don't have this very deep interaction with social sciences, technology is not going to work in its application for the good of mankind. It was really an incredible lesson for us because we're very proud of having done this in 6 weeks and interacted with Google and Apple and so on and done the right thing from a technology point of view, but from a communication, from interacting with the Swiss authorities. I have to say this, it was not easy at all. The result was unsatisfactory. It wasn't as bad as was said before. I think 25% of Swiss population has actually the Swiss COVID app, but what we needed to really master the pandemic would have been more like 60 or 75%, which was very hard to achieve. You also know that Switzerland has a low vaccination rate, which is another example of distrust. In that case, not of digital technology, but of just science, right? Science does a miracle, develops a vaccine in less than 12 months, and the Swiss population sort of says, nice, but maybe not. Incredible, okay, but that's a reality again. It's our limitation in interacting with society in general, in explaining science properly and so on. Good. Speaking of governance, you have heard this a million times. Data is the new oil, but it needs to be refined. But it has to be refined in a way that we understand, that is also properly regulated. And if we do this in a clean, ethical, and sustainable way, then data could be the new oil of a modern society where trust is being developed. This will require that we have digital governance, but very few of the companies involved in the business actually want digital governance, right? I mean, this is the Far West. You know, the Far West is a great place if you have a big gun and you can own a lot of territory. And as long as it goes, as long as it's the Far West, it's great for shareholder value. What I'm very surprised, and I also surprised here in Geneva, is that international governance is not being set up. That the reason is, of course, very simple. Cyberspace is like a new planet, and land grabbing is a long tradition when you have open new space that is not owned by anybody. And so for now, the various powers to be find this very convenient that this cyber planet is actually unregulated, so they can go for it and own large swaths of new territory. Okay, but this cannot go on forever. We still need, in this cyber planet, this cyberspace, we need all the features of the physical world, as long as we exist as physical beings. Maybe we'll be, at some point only live in the matrix, but for now we're still physically in a room. So we need trust, we need fairness, a big issue, for example, in machine learning. We need privacy, security. We need democratic control. This is something I have spent time on because in my job, I interact with politicians. I think there we have another limitation. It's not a criticism, but the people who are supposed to run these democratic processes have, how shall I call it, euphemistically, maybe a limited understanding of what's happening in the digital world. This is changing. There is a new generation of politicians coming, all over the world, including Switzerland, that have a certain, how shall I say, understanding of digital technologies. And I hope this will also change the way politics will look at regulation. Now, data itself is the ultimate interdisciplinary topic. If you think of science in general, science is about generating data and then generating knowledge out of data. Running many of our processes in the modern economy is about data, etc., etc. So it's certainly informed by natural science and technology, but it is really society that has to keep the lead on how to deal with data, with the issues that I mentioned before, like privacy and security and so on. Good. So all of this says we need to collaborate. We need to collaborate, and I'm very happy to say that here in Arc-Lémanique, we have an incredible collection of institutions that have a tradition of interacting, and as of late have actually interacted much more. The Graduate Institute, of course, the university here in Geneva, the university in Lausanne, and the IMD also in Lausanne. So we have 5 players that cover the entire spectrum from social sciences, humanities, to natural sciences, to computer science, and so on. And I say in collaboration with trust, a lot of things are already happening, and I'm very bullish about this. Because the potential is enormous, and I don't know any other place, I have to be very honest, I don't know any other place in the world that has this collection of high-quality institutes covering this broad spectrum. I mean, you can think of Harvard, they will say, well, MIT can do it alone. Well, no, sorry, MIT cannot do it alone. And Harvard, is very snobbish about technology, etc. I could go on. I think here we have also the fact that Switzerland is a neutral country. So when we deal with issues like this, we talk, from a from a point of view that I think is more respected than some other places on the planet that shall remain unnamed. We should take advantage of the fact that we are here in Geneva, in international Geneva, and all work together on this super important topic. I'm going to skip the next few slides because I think I'm running late, and just finish with the necessary New Yorker cartoon. Okay, for health and safety reasons, we'll be transitioning to cybercrime. I think many people have done that transition, and it's for society to, regulate this area as well. Thank you very much for your attention.